To describe the feeling of Andor as an artifact of the 80s would be somewhat like describing the many analogs of its age. It's a sentimental feeling that lives uniquely within the bricks and the screws of an ethos that this fantasy first defined. It is easy to imagine that this nostalgia is but a gimmick, but it's Andor that remembers what Star Wars used to be. In its sights and in its sounds, it imbues into sunsets the punctuality of an allegory, binary or otherwise. In all of its little ways, though, it's how that ethos is remembered, how the space and its faces frame Star Wars indirectly. We get a glimpse of real love between characters at a distance, from our serpent of the overworlds to his sun goddess above. It's this immutable feeling Star Wars that has resonated across decades with the tactility of a world that's as familiar as our own, and for Cassian specifically, he's the hero of this era as it's transmitted from the fringe of the uncivilized age. From his perspective, we find purpose, the many meanings of punctuality, as a chronological exercise and a narrative one. For every layer throughout this world, there is an equally steady message, and it's Cassian that reconnects us with the Star Wars of our past. Andor is a compliment paid in full to the original trilogy as it embraces the many analogs and the fantasies of its time. And so now, we're here, awaiting what's next for Andor as this final season approaches. I wonder if this feeling of old Star Wars is merely a coincidence, if the consistency of its looks and its sounds, of the feeling of it, is more common than we think. Perhaps we are too busy wading through the many blinders that come innate to nostalgia, and it's too soon to distinguish the differences. Or maybe, this is what Lucas had been dreaming about all of those years while he refined his line between invention and discovery. As the natural next step in that vision, Andor has become the answer to the question, why and how do we tell the meaning of Star Wars and do so completely? How do we represent an everlasting idea, and what does it look like? Who do we trust to carry the burden of that idea, and what does it look like? Of all of the Star Wars to attempt the answer over the last 40 or so years, it's Andor that first stays true to the muse. If Star Wars has a pulse, then Andor has captured its circadian rhythm almost effortlessly. An overlap of the generations sharing decades of technique, all derived from the same spirit that made the original trilogy what it is. It's a remarkable achievement to see Star Wars once again in its making, from ethos to aesthetic. It can reacquaint us with this feeling of an immutable space we used to be familiar with, untouched by time and sentiment. As these characters suffer through the twilight of Star Wars, they too are participating through this older era. We believe in it not only because of its triumphs, but because of its challenges. As Walt Whitman noted briefly in the late 19th century, we contain multitudes. If Season 2 is the last of this kind of Star Wars, then the question remains, what more should be said? What will Andor choose to contemporize, and how might it look? What will it sound like? What that can be said will Andor continue to be the first to say? And as always, thanks for watching.